Hi, it's James. Gonna do a pretty much a big question day today for my About Me video for Monday. John Cher asked me a question. Basically, I talk about my dad and my life and whatever with him, but why don't I talk about my mother? I guess the story starts with me. I was more or less an accident. My father and my mother, who they just got out of high school, were dating for a while, and as usual, how these things happen, one thing leads to another, and she ends up having me in her stomach. So instead of having a bastard son pop out, they got married late in 1973, and I popped out. My mother is a sweet woman, always was kind, good-hearted, caring, and basically my father was always, what I've always talked about. Unfortunately, when he's sober, he's a good man, works hard, but when he succumbed to his alcoholism, he was a violent and angry person. So my mother dealt with that for the first 4 years of my life. My brother Jeremy came along in '76, and I guess tried to make it work. And one day, when I was around 4 years old or so, my mother left. I don't blame her at all. Just the story is from the Charmack side of the family was my mother left with my father's best friend and went to Texas for a year. And that day she left, she just dropped she dropped me and my brother off at my aunt's, who were like in an apartment in the same building. So my father came home to find that. So in '78, my father later on, my father moved my brother and myself to the house that I lived in for the better part of 30 years on McDonald Road in Syracuse, and my grandmother's house at the time. So, and then my mother came back to file for divorce and try to get custody. Stating spousal abuse. My father was an abusive parent and whatever. And he was abusive and a drunkard, which is, she's not lying about that. She's truthful, but unfortunately, it was at a time where basically the father would more or less get preferential treatment in courts, I guess, more or less, because he's a breadwinner and whatnot, and my father was awarded primary custody, with my mother getting visitation rights every Sunday. And my grandmother, this very strong-willed, very stubborn Irish woman, her maiden name was Sullivan, so she just, my father was a victim because my mother left, and left the kids, so she had to take responsibility, more or less. This is basically, from the point of view I've been taught for years. I acknowledge that my father was abusive and an alcoholic and whatnot. I dealt with that through my childhood, but my mother wanted to get out. That's fine. I understand that. But the way my grandmother would tell it, my mother just was this evil person, and usually she would try to get it so we wouldn't go for our visitations, more or less. So I would be the one to answer my phone. My mother, because if my grandmother answered the phone, and be like, "No, they're not going." So I would answer the phone and say, "Whenever you're ready," or whatever. And predominantly for those visitations, we would go to my other grandparents who lived in Tully, and they had a pretty decent farm. They lived at the foot of a mountain in Tully, and had three wonderful dogs in a backyard, and had a nice rural environment. I'd watch doctor who would, with my grandfather, I would read. My grandmother Lewis had books and books and books and child books all over the place, and I would, me and my brother would spend Sundays there for the afternoon, and this was going well for the first year or so until 1980 when my half brother got born, and down the line in 81 he started getting sick. So my grandmother decided, she was going to say stop the visitation rights because, apparently she doesn't want to see you because because her other son is sick. So she's using that as an excuse. So she doesn't want to see you, boys. So I think you should stop visiting her altogether. So for the longest time, I probably saw my mother once a year, predominantly in the 1980s. And 84, I think, was when my mother remarried, and she was in an apartment in Nedrow, and she unfortunately fell in with another alcoholic, abusive guy. It was probably a little worse than my father, I guess, but she produced another half sister of mine, and I wanted to visit my mother. My father would go behind my grandmother's back to try to set up visitations or whatever, or like just literally out of the blue, my father would be like, "Hey, you want to go visit your mother? Well, I have the number right here or whatever, so I got it from your grandparents, Lewis. So if don't tell your grandma. So if you want to go visit your mother, I'll arrange it for like a weekend." So every now and then I would go visit my mother for the weekends and whatnot, which it was always a good time. I like being around my mother. My mother's a good person, always has been. It's just unfortunately when you have when you have a divorce, you have two sides of the story, and unfortunately I was in the one side of the story where basically your mother abandoned you, so she doesn't love you, and stuff like that from my mother and my grandmother, I should say, not my mother. And well, my father is just like, well, my father never fell out of love with my mother, but he understood why she couldn't stay and whatever. And I literally probably visited with my mother, spent some nights throughout the 90s at whatever place she was living at. Predominantly in the early 90s, she was on the south side, the west side of Syracuse, probably maybe literally 2 miles away from me. So I once or twice I've taken the bus to spend like a spring week there, but I had to always call back home, and my grandmother was always come home every night, because unfortunately my grandmother had this bigger destiny that she had planned out for me than I wanted. So my mother loves me. My mother always loved me. She understood I was a little different. She still understands I'm a little different than your average person, and accepts that. And she was, when I went to I told her I was going to college, she was absolutely thrilled. When I graduated from college, she was absolutely thrilled. She for when I got my associate's degree and when I had my bachelor's degree, she showed up for both of them and took pictures. I actually have the picture way in the back with my brother and I and my mother in the middle when I had received my bachelor's degree. And she asked me for one piece that I did. I submitted into the city for would-be scholarship, and I gave it to her. She was so proud of my art and me being an artist, and she would tell everyone about me being an artist. And well, right now, my mother's 20 years older than me, so she's 62. She recently just retired from a plant that she's working on in Casanova, and she lives in Kyler, New York, with a man who has treated her like gold for the past 20 years, and I thank him for it. He's done a amazing job with her, and he has made her so happy, and she's made him happy, and I can't think enough of it. So every now and then I've tried to make visits to her, but the last time I did, I've talked about the last time I did where the half sister I disowned, try to destroy the relationship with my mother. So yeah, it's these videos more or less for me talking about how my head's not right, and what brought me to my depression and whatnot. So I'm not going to talk about my mother predominantly, because she hasn't done anything to really destroy me. Unfortunately, it was my father's side of the family, between my grandmother and my father, and it is what it is, I guess. So my mother. I'm going to quote Vince Vaughn here. My mother, Bonnie Lewis Peck, is a saint. She always has been, and she always will be, and I love her. So yeah, that's today's video. Thank you for watching.